Well, they never learn boundaries. People who take on false sense of responsibility, the person that's controlling their boundaries is the other person. And the other person redraws the boundaries. The person that's taking on the responsibility never gets to draw the boundary for their own life.
Right.
You
right.
know?
We're talking about false sense of responsibility today. I feel like this is kind of a heavy subject, and also not talked about enough.
Yes, so I don't really hear it talked about at all. And sometimes when I do hear it talked about, there's always a antagonist and a protagonist, and
Sure.
you know, like it's always a bad person, evil person, a good person that was taken advantage of. But I want to elaborate a little bit on it and how it can happen. You can find yourself in this situation.
Yeah. Let me first just define it. So what is false responsibility? This occurs when an individual feels compelled to take on duties or obligations or burdens that are not rightfully theirs or that exceed their reasonable scope. This can happen in various contexts, such as personal relationships, our work environments, or community settings. Let's kind of break that down a little bit. So you and I talked about sometimes this can be initiated in a couple different ways.
It can. So taking on false responsibility, let me just back up just a little bit.
Okay.
Taking on false responsibility is usually where I see this the most. Don't come for me, but it's the family setting. It's usually children taking on false responsibility for younger siblings, or being responsible for the financial situation of the house because their families. There's just these false expectations or responsibilities that can be implied. I see it at a time. I see it in the workplace. The good employee who doesn't have to be told, but just takes initiative and does things. We say take initiative. Okay, but really it's taking on false responsibility sometimes. Your manager's dropping the ball. Your higher ups are dropping the ball and you're filling in the gap. Sometimes that can be okay. Sometimes it can not be. It can be very unhealthy.
Well, I think sometimes, especially if it's not necessarily communicated, it's just like this sense of responsibility that you have to take up. You can be taken advantage of.
And if there is a taking on a false responsibility, you usually will not get credit for it. But you can see people. Well, they're reliable. Right? They're not giving you credibility, but they're reliable. So the problem with it is it can be initiated in two ways. Okay? The first way you will see this initiated, and you'll see it in people where they feel like everything is their responsibility and they're the responsible one, is when somebody in authority, parent, supervisor, grandparent, wherever you are, somebody that is in direct authority over you has said to you, this is your responsibility. Okay? Your sibling is your responsibility. You need to make sure your siblings eat lunch. You need to make something. You need to make sure they're doing well in school.
Right. Like, you're the oldest one. Set an example.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's why I always feel like oldest children need the most therapy. But it is. It's, growing up Asian, this definitely is. But in bigger families where we have lots of family, if you're the oldest cousin, the younger cousins are your responsibility, or the younger kids around you, like you need to be watching out for them. So they're telling you this is your role. Like they're defining the role of what it is to be a sibling or a neighbor or a cousin or whatever that looks like, or a boy. You're the oldest boy. You're the oldest girl. Like these are the definitions. So this is, you have to do this. Someone's directly telling you that. Okay. They might not directly tell you. They might imply it in a very sly, passive-aggressive way. That, well, no one's doing anything for me, right? So it's implied. There's like this implication a little bit.
Well, and if you think about that, like a situation that might be implied in the workplace, it's like you're, as someone who might want to people please. You're going to step up and try to take on that responsibility. And maybe it's to be seen. Maybe it's to work towards a promotion of some kind. But it's like, if you see a need, no one's filling in the gap. Well, guess I'm going to do it. You know what I mean?
Yes. Workplace things that I see that I feel like this takes on is people who do not have families or children, like they're single, somehow should take on a larger workload.
Because they don't have children to pick up or something. Yeah.
They shouldn't get Mother's Day off. They should, like whatever it is. Like, well, I mean, she's going to go with her family to spend Christmas. Everyone has a family.
Right.
So there's like this, and I've seen it.
I have too.
Yeah. So like, you've decided, like getting married or not having children is for you, but somehow like now every holiday you have to work or those type of things. There's a value placed on that. And it's this fake sense of responsibility. Hey, you should want them to spend their time with their family. Somehow you were not important. So it can, like I said, authority can imply that, right? The second way that it can be initiated, and I see this happen very often too, is you self-imply it. No one has to say anything, but since you've already been in a culture where you take on responsibility, as soon as someone says a need or declares a need, no one says, here, Julie, you need to do this. You're like, I need to do that. I should be the one that does that. I need to take care of that. They need that. And so you put that responsibility in your mind that it is your responsibility to take care of that. And that's unhealthy too, because it's coming from the years of somebody else implying false responsibility to you. So what happens is these type of people have difficulty setting boundaries, understanding what their roles are. So you might be a mom, but now you're a mom and a dad. You might be, you might be a mom, dad, and a parent to your sibling. You might be financially responsible, even though you're not supposed to be financially responsible for all these people. You're supposed to celebrate this person. It's the right thing to do. You might be taken advantage because you're financially stable.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places where you see this happening. And in the name of love, family, honor, I've seen it manipulated and misused in so many ways.
Yeah.
It's dishonorable if you don't do this. You're not a good sibling. You're not a good daughter. You're not a good son.
Yeah, we talk about the Asian culture, and I spent many years living in an Asian country, and so it's like the whole family thing, the honor and the respect towards elders is something that's so valued. But at the same time, there was a level of almost like manipulation of it as well, which is kind of a heavy word to use, but I think sometimes it is. And I think for families and individuals that grow up in that kind of culture, if you step out of those boundaries, it's like you're being disrespectful. Or
you don't love your family enough. And I think the problem with that is honor never comes at the expense of disgracing yourself. Honor will never come at the expense, whether it be whoever you're honoring. Do I think you should not take responsibility for everything and love yourself all the time? No, I'm not saying that. I think loving people and loving those around you is important. And Absolutely. I think there's a place and time for all of that. But taking on a false responsibility that is not yours has left people in cycles that they're unable to come out of. And what happens with that mindset, taking on false responsibility, is it hinders you in every area of your life.
Absolutely. I mean, it keeps you from being able to be maybe working towards your purpose or the things that you're trying to do, or if there's issues that you're dealing with, you stay in that cycle because you're continuing to do the same behavior repeatedly because you're trying to meet someone else's expectations.
Yeah, and you're fulfilling a need for somebody else that's not really yours, and someone's deceived you into thinking that it is your responsibility. And so the problem with that is because it was never your role. You're never going to be successful. You're never going to make anyone happy, you or the other person happy, because you can't fulfill something you're not in the role for. And so it creates this cycle, and it's difficult to come out of because you want to be a good person. People who take on false responsibility are usually good people.
Yeah.
They want to be good to the people around them. They want to be good for the welfare of others. They try to be good people, but the problem is it always holds them back.
Yeah.
You'll always see them being held back.
Well, what happens with that is when you are over serving or trying to meet everyone else's expectations, you're not having those healthy boundaries for yourself. And so it holds you back. It just completely holds you back. But then on the flip side of that, I think when individuals are kind of more aware of that and you begin setting boundaries, then sometimes there's offense that comes, or feelings are hurt on the opposite side and don't know how to manage that. It makes it really challenging in relationships.
Well, they never learn boundaries. People who take on false sense of responsibility, the person that's controlling their boundaries is the other person. And the other person redraws the boundaries. The person that's taking on the responsibility never gets to draw the boundary for their own life.
Right, right.
So what happens is somebody will, here, this expectation is now done, so you need to fulfill this one. Because anyone can put off their responsibility on you, they're going to do it. And so that's and if you're not going to say, hey, that's not responsibility. I think me and you talked one time about a situation I had at work, and, this person had a presentation, had ample enough time to complete the presentation, and shows up like 2 hours before the meeting, an hour before I'm going on lunch, which is very important to me. So
obviously, to
tell me that this presentation is not ready, and just was frazzled and just,
freaking out, frantic about it.
And I had a choice there because this person's my friend. Do I not eat lunch and help this person? Or, look, what's my responsibility here as a fellow employee and as a friend? And the first thing I said to that person is, I said, hey, I'm going to go to lunch. And they're like, no, you got to help me with this. And I was like, hey, your lack of preparation does not constitute an emergency on my part.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and be frazzled with you and just in a hurry, in a rush, because you did not prepare well. And I'm not saying that's always the situation. There was no death in the family. There was no illness. There was nothing severe happened. It would be different if something like that happened and they're like, hey, I have this presentation. My dog died last week. And I'd be like, hey, let me help you with that. That's a totally different situation. But that's not what happened here. This is, you were going to wing it. Or in their mind, I'll just tell Julie to help me and I can get it done really fast.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's what she did, but I'm just saying that could have been the thought process. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to take, just because you're not prepared doesn't mean I'm going to now, it's an emergency for me. No.
Yeah. Thinking back on just different work scenarios for myself, I was in a role where my role was to help some salespeople, but same scenario. They would wait to the last minute, and sales pressure is sales pressure. They're trying to get in and meet with a client. They need my help to put something together, but when they had time to put something on the calendar, they didn't do it. And so, like right before the meeting or the night before, they're freaking out about it. And I'm like, what about my time? Like, I've been available to you, and so. Sometimes it's kind of a fine line. Like, how do you help somebody prepare but not be taken advantage of as well? You know what I'm saying? So kind of a similar thing. But I feel like with sales sometimes, and anybody who's listening or watching, if you work in sales, like, you could relate. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think about my husband, and sometimes I try to coach him on sales and expectations with communication and customers, and he's like, Taryn, you're not in my job. Like, you don't understand. I'm like, no, but I do understand some of the sales, maneuvering, and there does have to be proper expectations set, because otherwise you can get taken advantage of, and you have to have boundaries for yourself. Because if you don't have those boundaries, you can't be as productive as you need to be with the other scope of your own responsibilities. Yeah,
but I also feel like even though I had, growing up, like, these expectations put on me, there were a lot of expectations I took on my own.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah, that created my own frustrations. And then I'm bitter with people. I'm like, well, they never told you to do that? So why are you mad at them? You took that upon yourself to do that. And so that's when I learned that I can't be upset at someone who didn't require anything of me. And not only did they not require it, when I helped them, they took my help. Of course they did.
Yeah.
Because I took initiative for that. So it's also me realizing I don't have any of my own boundaries, and if I didn't really want to do that, why did I take on that false responsibility? Who told me that I needed to do that? And so it's also the self-awareness of where is this boundary? Now, that doesn't mean if you want to do something, there's a lot of things that I've done. Like when people have, like whatever it is, my parents, my sibling, they're like, hey, can you help me with this? Yeah, I want to. So that's not false responsibility. Like if you've made a decision, I'm going to help with this. That's a different situation. But when someone is trying to imply, or you're implying yourself that something out of your scope is your responsibility, you need to really think about, is this my job duties? Is this my role? Like, is this how this is it my responsibility? We don't see it as much but when we were growing up, it's very common for you to take care of your siblings. Like siblings become parents,
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know I have. And part of that expectation was put on me, but part of it, I took on the role. You know what I'm saying? And I think sometimes that can be unhealthy. It can create, just a little bit of challenge with the communication within the siblings. And, there are things that I took on as a parent. I wasn't the parent, like we've talked about this, and, it can cause frustration for sure.
Yeah. So I think, what you usually see is people who take on false responsibility, a lot of anxiety, a lot of perfectionism, they're adding on other things, and now they have to fight through and become healthy through, feeling responsible for things that they're not responsible for. And because they have the feeling of responsibility, they think it is their responsibility.
Yeah, that is me. I mean, that is me. I remember we all grow, right? We all have this journey that we're growing and navigating life. But I think back on different times where I felt responsible. So I felt like I had to do something about it. I felt like I had to interject or take control. And I don't think that's the right answer.
No, because you're trying to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all that happens is in your fixing is other people just get bitter with you. Because they know you're overstepping boundaries, but you're just trying to help. So it's not like it comes from a bad place. It's not coming from a bad place. It's coming from a good intention. But here's the problem with good intentions. Good intentions do not negate the bad impact it had.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, my intention was this. Well, you hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
So just because your intention was good doesn't mean their feelings weren't hurt.
Doesn't make up for it.
Yeah. Just because your intentions was good doesn't mean that ending poorly is irrelevant. No, it ended poorly. So your intentions being good is not justifiable for what it created.
Yeah.
Which could be a bad impact.
Yeah.
And you see it in leadership a lot. My intentions were good. Impact was horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and we justify ourselves with that. My intentions are pure. My intentions were good. But it's like the impact was bad. So you have to take some type of responsibility for the bad impact and to be like, hey, my intention was this, but I see that it just created a mess, and understand, then take a few steps back and then be like, hey, maybe I need better boundaries here. I think also people need to understand that people need to take responsibility for their own life situations. When other people make bad life choices, there's no responsibility that you can take on to help them resolve their bad life choices. Because you haven't taught them to make better choices. You're trying to fix the bad choices they made, the consequences of the bad choices they made.
Right.
And so so you just see people in cycles. People who take on false responsibility, they're always running in circles. You always see it happening. And you never see them break out of anything because it's difficult for them. And it comes from a broken place. You're finding your value in helping everybody. Right. You're finding your value in fixing the problem. You're finding your value to make sure everyone's happy, everyone's good. People who take on false responsibility tend to be peacemakers too.
Yeah. I've had this conversation so many times, like even with my husband about things. And I mean, I know that we're all different. Everybody comes from different background, different upbringing, but I'm like, and he'll even do it with me. I'm like, I don't want you to do what you think I want done. You know what I'm saying? Because I would much rather prefer like intentionality than you trying to accomplish something just because you think that's what I want. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And, sometimes I think until we get to a healthier place, that cycle does continue, and it can hinder you from growing and developing as an individual and having healthier, communication, whether it's your spouse or whether it's with someone at work. You said something having leaving a terrible impact. Like I think about leadership sometimes in the workplace, that they make decisions or they articulate things, but it doesn't go over well. And it's like, then that impacts everybody all down the line. And it's like, if it was communicated differently, it doesn't matter what the intention was, because the damage has already been done, which is what you said, And so I think that if we just, took a moment to understand how to articulate better as individuals, but breaking that cycle, I think is hard. So, I mean, what do you think, if we think about ourselves, what is it that's kind of helped to break some of that cycle? I mean, being aware, I guess.